In User Lesson 7, Part 2, we're going to go over invoicing and payments in TrackerRMS. So first thing we'll take a look at is the invoice template that's on the system, how it can be customized. So this is also covered off in Admin Lesson 10, so you can take a little bit of a deeper dive around the settings. But we'll go ahead and take a look at the standard templates on the system. And in the standard templates under the system folder, this is where you will have access to your sales invoice template. So this is a letter type template that has the actual invoice itself. If you go into the text, this is where we can change around the information of this particular invoice to put in your personal info. So this is where we could enter in our address if we wanted. You will notice that if you hit enter, it does go down 2 different rows. So if you want it to only go down 1, you can hold down the shift key and hit enter. But this is where we can start to personalize the actual invoice itself. You can have your address in there. If there's any tagged information that you want to remove, you can take those tags and remove them if it isn't something that you guys are using. The invoice items is where you can change that in invoice settings to have those appear or not. And then at the very bottom, you will notice that you can put in any details down here about the company if you want. These can be removed. You can also put in any bank details if you wanted to change this information or remove this entirely. And at the very bottom, you do have the red footer where you can say, all invoices are, due by XYZ. You could put in any type of information or footer that you would want at the very bottom of this particular template. So if we hit save and close, that template is now updated. Now the other thing you may want to do is build an actual template, which is an email that can be sent out that you customize the verbiage of. So this could be, your invoice is ready, or it could be some type of template name. Now, the association down below is where you would want to pick on where are we sending this from. So if you're going to be invoicing from the project, you may want to have the project type so that when you're raising it from the project itself, which is where the template will be due. Most of the time, you are going to have it be an invoice template because you're actually sending it out from the invoice itself. So here you can place this in, but this is up to you where you would want this template to be. If you hit save and continue, you can now go into the template itself, and you could say, your invoice is ready. Down below, this is where you can start to build out your email. You can use your tags to put in the information, so you can have their contact first name, and you could say, please find attached your invoice. And in here, you can also use the tags to bring in any information. You could say the date on there, which is due on. You could also bring in the invoice due date. Whatever information you would want inside this template, this can obviously be customized as much as you want. There is workflow attached, so you can also say if there is any additional statuses for those invoices. Typically, it is just going to be if it's raised, if it's paid, or if it's bad debt. You can also have some workflow or auto follow-ups around those, just like you would in other parts of the system. So if we hit save and close, we can now build a template that can be sent out. And we've also customized the invoice template itself. So now we'll go in and we'll take a look at one of our projects, which is where our time has been booked in. So if you've made placements, you have candidates that are out working and they've booked in time. So in this project, we'll take a look at our timesheet block and we'll see that Andrew has booked in some time against this particular project. So in the project itself, you can go out into the touch bar, and inside of the touch bar, you'll see you can raise an invoice or you can raise a payment from here. Now, if I hit raise an invoice, we'll have a screen that will show the default details here. So right now the database setting is 30 days, so the due date will be just 30 days from there. You will see that the invoice owner is going to be the person who raised it. Now the invoice contact here is going to be blank to show where this can be updated inside the project itself. The commercial contact is going to be what updates that invoice owner. So this field, if I update and put Peter Jones, if there is a different invoicing contact, you can choose from the list of the companies, or you can add a new one in here. Now the invoice can only be defaulted to go to one person, but when it is sent out, you will see that you can add into the CC or the BCC line of that invoice. So now we'll go back and we'll hit raise an invoice again, and you'll see here that Peter Jones, his info is pulling in. Now if he had all of his address and details on this particular invoice, you would see it would all pull down below. It is driven from his contact record, so you would want to check that contact record to make sure that everything is entered. Now the invoice template is going to pull from your template that's on the system. The purchase order, it can be left blank. If you want to assign a purchase order against this particular template, you can hit the green plus button. You can go in and we can put in a PO number. You can also put in a budget if there's a particular budget against that PO. When you add that in, you can select it from the drop-down, and you can also change the date, the due date, and then of course the payment date is going to be to track when that invoice was paid. So here you'll see if I hit save and continue, it's going to assign an invoice number, which will just start out and go up one number incrementally. At the very top, we'll see our ability to email, send that invoice, and print it. But if we look at the tab that opens up on the left-hand side, the invoice items, this is where I can click on that and we can add the invoice items and decide what it is we're invoicing. So in this section where I have add invoice item, I can go in and add a new item if I just want to type in something and add a one-off item into there. I always can. I can add from product or services if you have built out products and services on the system. You can add from job product, which is going to tag in any products that have been assigned against the job. Typically, you're going to be adding from the bottom three. So working candidates is going to add from all working candidates. Add from timesheets is going to add from the timesheets, and then add from expenses will book in from expenses. So if we hit add from timesheets, what Tracker does is it's going to pop up a window, and it's going to ask you what's the date range we want to invoice. So if we wanted to invoice for March 21st through to the end of March, we could enter that information. We can say, do I want all candidates? Do I want a particular candidate on that project? Do I want anything that's in all statuses, or do I only want pending, approved, or denied time? So you can do some different options here. You can say I want all booked days or only days that are billable. And then I can have all days or only days that are uninvoiced previously. It can be displayed on invoice by the candidate, by the activity, by the candidate and the activity, or by the candidate and the purchase order. So it is able to be displayed differently, and you can put in a tax rate. Now there is the option to replace any existing items, and you can also update the activities to invoiced on the system as well. So here, if I hit add activities, what you'll see is it will drop in the amount of time in here. Now, you always want to make sure that there are, accurate details against it. So in this one, for this particular candidate, this would indicate that there was no pay rate added against that particular task. So you can always go in and change the value. So here, if we knew that the charge rate was $30, we could add that in, and this can be impacted here just by hitting the calculator. If it was $720 was the total invoice, we could hit save and close, and that would refresh, and those values would drop in. So it can always be changed or edited within here, but this will pull through from the actual timesheet of what's been booked in. So the total value is set at $720. We also have the status here, which is set as unpaid. You can unmark or mark it as paid. And then if you have set up any of the payment profiles, you could select the time and we could apply a payment profile if there were different profiles that you have been in there. So if there were a monthly profile, something like that that you have built out, the payment profile, what it will do is it will take that invoice and it will alter the amounts and produce new invoices as defined in the profile stages of how that's been built out. So here, if I wanted to add these items in, I could do that. And now sending the invoice out, I could go in and I can either email it, I can hit send, or I can hit print. So if I hit send invoice, it's going to pop up my folders. And this is where I can use my template that we built. I can pick up my invoice template or your invoices ready, which is the one that we built. If I preview and pick up that template, you'll see here that we have a very simple email that will pop up. It'll have Peter entered in. We have our subject line. The invoice is going to be attached as a PDF, and all we have to do is go in and hit send a template, and that email will send out to the candidate or to the client, and we can hit save and close. And now that invoice has been raised and can be managed in the system. So there's a number of different places that the invoices can be viewable. So one, inside of the invoice section of the project, you can see it. You also do have the ability to look at those invoices at a company record. You can also go in and under the Finance tab, you have the All Invoices, or I can see what has been raised, what's paid, and use the different filters. So if I wanted to see all raised invoices on the system, you can go in and I can use the filters here to show when the invoices were raised. So here we have an invoice that was raised on April 5th that's due May 5th. And I can have all of these organized by the different statuses that are on the system. So that's how you can raise an invoice directly from a project. Now, there are multiple different ways you can raise an invoice. I can also raise it from the invoice section itself. Here, it is going to ask you to raise it from the opportunity record because it's always easiest to go in and invoice directly from the project, the job, so it's pulling through all of those defaults that are on the system. So now, if I wanted to take this invoice, if the client had paid it, in order to enter in an invoice as paid, all you have to do is open up that invoice on the system. You can go into that invoice and we can indicate the payment date. If it was paid on the 5th of April, we can enter in that date. You can put in any type of notes, any type of terms you would want on here. And the invoice item itself, if there were multiple lines, you could go in and you could take each line and mark it if it has been paid or unpaid. Now, when you hit the checkbox, you can also open up that particular line itself, and there is an unpaid and paid section. So I can hit save and close, mark that as paid. I can go into the invoice itself, and the status of it, I can say we want this to be ticked off as paid. When I hit save and close, that will take that invoice and mark it as paid on the system. You'll see it will drop off of the current page that you're on. So that invoice is now no longer viewable as a raised invoice. So if I were to change my filters and look at our paid invoices, here I would see that we have an invoice that's ticked as a green check mark because it has been paid on the system. This particular invoice has now been entered in. If I go back into Company C's record, you also do have the ability to have any invoices shown from this History tab here. So here I can see that this particular invoice has been paid for this client, and I can manage all of those from this level of the system. So the invoices, there are also reports you can build. So with the report wizard of Tracker, if you go in and look at the build custom report, if there are any unique views of reports that you would need, this is where I can go in and I can use invoice data type. And then here I can pull reports off of company invoices, job invoices, or invoice items. So if I needed a particular invoice from a company view, I could go in and build a simple list, and you'll see that all of your tags that are available in an invoice can be brought in, and you can build a report off of that. So really good report view, an ability to build anything that you would need that's a little bit unique as far as the invoices go. But that's going to be the basics of how you can raise an invoice from a project, pulling in time, and then how that can be sent out on the system, as well as marked off as paid. So the next piece we'll take a look at is payments on Tracker. So the difference between an invoice is going to be something that you're sending to a client that's payable to you. A payment is how you can track a payment that is going out to a supplier on the system. So this is where the supplier company type comes into play. So if payments are something you're interested in tracking, you would need to first off make sure that you have a company type that is set to supplier. In order for a payment to be made, the company type would have to be identified as a supplier. So this, you can either go in and say, all right, we want to make anybody that's a client a supplier on the system, or you could add in a brand new type, and this could be vendor. You could say, yes, we want to tag them as a supplier. We want them to be an existing type of client. I can hit OK, and we'd now have an extra type of company that would be identified as a vendor on the system. So same thing here. If I wanted to put a brand new company on the system, we could enter in our company X. We could tag them as a vendor. We could put in all of our information on the system for that particular company. Now I'm just going to go ahead and hit Save and Continue to put that company on. Now from here, of course, we'd probably want to put our contact in. So let's go ahead and use our touch bar to add our contact for this particular company. And we'll say that this is, accounts receivable. Or we'll just call it AR. For the first name in here, if our person in AR was Mary Smith, we could enter in her name. And here we could have the contact type as well. If we wanted to identify the contact type, I could put this person as the primary contact for this particular company, hit Save and Continue, and now we put our contact on the system. So obviously we'd probably want to have email in here if we are emailing the invoices, any additional contact info for this particular contact that's on the system. But now if we went back into our company X record, this is where if we wanted to raise a payment in the system, there's a number of different ways that it can be done. So here inside of a company, you'll notice that if we go into the touch bar, you're going to see the ability to raise an invoice. Payments aren't going to be directly in the touch bar. So here under the history section, this is where you're going to track your invoices. So if payments were something that you did want to use, you can go out into your tools menu and make sure that payments are added into the layout that you're using. So we can go into our layout designer. We can pull up our recruiter layout, which is what we're using currently. We can go into our company view, and you'll see that we have our payments on the left-hand side that we can bring over into our view and place wherever we want. So if we wanted those right underneath invoices, we could. I can hit Save Layout, and we could go in back into our company record. And here now, if I go into the History tab, I now have our payment section. So if I wanted to create a payment, I can hit the Create Payment button. And in here, I have the supplier contact, so I could pick Mary Smith. In here, if I had set up our payment categories. This is where you could select what type of payment it is. You can put in the payment date, the payment due date as well, and any additional information that you would want on the system. Here, when we hit save and continue, it's going to populate your payment items. I can put in our items, and I could say, we had our initial payment. If this was, 1 unit and it was a value of $1,000, I could enter that in. I can hit the calculator to go in and put a subtotal and a total value. If there's any taxes, I could also enter those in. And we could say, here's our item that was paid. So we have our initial payment. We could track that it was paid on April 5th. And any additional information that we wanted to capture on this payment, we could. If it was pending, we could track that. If we had already paid this particular payment, we could go in, hit save and close, and we could log that as a paid payment that is out to this particular supplier. So you can keep track of all of that information. So we could see that we have paid our company X. We could see the subtotal. We could see the due date, the actual payment date, and what the status is. So the same way that you have all the filters for your invoices on the system, the payments will allow you to go in and show what payments are new, what payments are pending, what's been paid. So it is a way that any payments that are raised can be managed through the payment portion of Tracker. Now there are some settings that go into that to see how you can set those up. Check out Admin Lesson 10, which goes over how you can put in some of the different payment types and settings in the system. So that goes over User Lesson 7, which is going over invoices and payments on Tracker.